Hey developers, today we're going to look at the Vue CLI Apollo plugin. We're going to look at installing it and see what files it adds to our project. Hey, and if you don't know, my name is Eric. I'm a full stack software developer. I'm also the author of the Vue.js in action book published by Manning. So make sure if you're interested in that, I'll give you the first chapter of the book for free. You just click on the link in the description and you can get started. So Vue CLI 3, there's a ton of different plugins you can get. One of them I want to talk to you about is the Apollo plugin. So this is perfect if you are creating a GraphQL database and you need to have your Vue project talk to it. Now the Vue CLI Apollo plugin actually comes with some ways you can get started. It has some boilerplate code that is really useful, and it's also a great way to just kind of understand how you use Vue Apollo, which is another plugin, and how that kind of all ties together and how you can work with it. And so if you look down here with the Vue CLI Apollo plugin, you can quick start Vue add Apollo. We'll do that in a second. But if you go to get started, actually, let's look here inside the GitHub. You can see some of the features it gives you. So it gives you a config file that you can set up for WebSockets file uploads, and it has the client state for Apollo link state. Actually, as of Apollo 2.5, this is actually included inside the library, so you don't need to have this included as well. But I believe they don't include it inside the install because it's already built into Apollo now. And then it tells you it has some optional GraphQL server that you can install just right off the bat. It embeds it directly inside the Vue project, and then you can customize and edit and update. This is a really good learning experience, especially if you don't know a lot about GraphQL. It is a little high level at first. It confused me when I first looked at it. I'm not a GraphQL expert, but I'll show you what it comes with. And you can upgrade your service running Apollo server. Once again, WebSockets. Has Apollo engine support, which I haven't used, but I guess it's a way you can, if you look at it here, Apollo engine is a platform, like a commercial platform to upload your schemas to, and you can do a lot of things. Maybe that's for another video. You can it includes a GraphQL playground, configures the UI, and then it comes with some examples of like using Apollo, Vue Apollo, so you have queries and mutations and all that. It's all written in there. So let's get started and let's take a look at what it looks like when you add it to your Vue project. All right, so here is my Vue project. I went ahead and created it already. I have Vue CLI 3 installed. I just did Vue create and the name of the project. So that's how I did that. So to add this Vue CLI Apollo, so I'll do Vue add Apollo. And what this will do is it'll go ahead and add everything to our project. So this will just take a second. Okay, so during the installation, it's going to ask us a few questions. So it's going to ask us if we want to install the example code. So we'll choose yes there. And add a GraphQL API server. So we might as well put yes there too. And then enable automatic mocking. We're going to leave that no. We're not going to add the Apollo engine either. So we'll go ahead and install all those dependencies for us. Okay, great. So everything is installed now. And if you look here, it added all these files, which we'll take a look at. It edited some files too. And then it also installed the packages we need. So if we look inside, let's just take a look at our package.json file. You can see here it added GraphQL type JSON as a dependency. It added LowDB, which is like a small JSON database for Node Electron in the browser. This is used with the GraphQL database, so it saves to the database, which I believe is on just the local drive. It's like a local database. And then it looks like short ID. These are kind of like to make little unique identifiers like GUIDs. Of course, Vue Apollo, Vue Router, and GraphQL tag. That's how you do your querying. The plugin Apollo, and a few other things in the dev dependencies. So to see what it did, it also, like I said, it added a bunch of code. So the first thing you can see here, this is the code for the component. It's called Apollo example that it added to our project. So what we can do here is we look inside our views and go to our home. We have just the hello world, but we can replace that and add that. Instead of doing the hello world, we can do the Apollo example. And then we'll start grabbing the hello world. We'll grab the hello Apollo example instead. And then up here, I'll just change this and we'll add the Apollo example instead. So now we have that all updated, so we can now run our server. So we were npm run serve, and that'll go ahead and run it, and then we can take a look at just what it looks like with the sample component that it added. And while we're at it, we actually do have an Apollo server. And if you look at the package.json file that we looked at earlier, there's now a new command that we can now run Apollo and Apollo run, so we can actually run the Apollo server. So I'm going to open up another bash window here. This is Visual Studio Code, of course, and you can open up multiple windows. And I'm going to run npm run Apollo, and that'll go ahead and start the GraphQL server, which is really cool that it just has it all built in there. So it looks like it's running on localhost 4000, and it should be already set up for us. So I'm going to go ahead and open this in a different browser, and I'll look at it over here to show you guys. All right, so we can bring it over here. And here is the playground. Actually, I have some old stuff in here when I was just playing around. But so here is what it comes with out of the box. So you can create queries. We have hello, messages, and uploads. We can do mutations. So just the simplest way to do it would be just to do, we'll delete this. And if we, run hello, and we run this, you can see here, returns back to hello as we expected. We can also look at messages, and we could see what's in there, like text, and we'll play it, and it says there's nothing in the messages right now, it's empty. And we can do the same thing with uploads if we wanted to. So now the server is running, so we should be able to open up localhost 4000. Actually 8080, excuse me. Oh yeah, we need to do one more thing. We just need to add it in here to Apollo example. I'll save it. Okay, so I'll go ahead and pull the window over. And you can see here is the GraphQL app. And I just have, there's not much to it right now, but it has this name at the bottom and a message, and then I can upload a file. So if I say, my name's Erik, it says hello Erik, I could type a message and hit enter, and it shows up here. This is also if I open another localhost 8080, you see the message is still there, so this is being broadcasted to every client that's connected. And then I can also upload an image. Let's see for my last video. And it uploads it here. Once you refresh here, you'll see it here. Now we can actually, since we added a couple of messages and even a file, we can go into the playground and we can take a look. So if I hit the play button, you can see here's my message that I sent. If I wanted to take a look at the upload, so I can do uploads, like here. And then I can grab, the file name. You can see here, error handling in JavaScript.ping file. That's the file name that I uploaded. So that's cool. So we know that our GraphQL server is working, and this little sample app that we created is doing it. But you're probably wondering how it's working. So that's where we want to kind of take a look at a little bit more in depth. So first we can take a look at the Apollo server. And I won't get too much into this, but essentially what's happening is we have this GraphQL schema that has these, you can see here, it has the way we set up the schema of the GraphQL server. So we have a counter, we have messages, message input, a file, queries, mutations, subscriptions. That's all set up for us. We have resolvers, which kind of shows how it's doing everything. You can see this DB right here, and this resolver, that's the third input. If you look at this context file, it's actually putting this DB from utils DB. And the same thing, process upload. And if you go in the utils folder, this is the low DB kind of database that we have, and I believe it's using the file sync adapter, so it's just creating a local file on the file system called live.db.json, and that's how it's saving it. So that's like the configuration for it. And then we have an upload file, and this is how it does the upload with create write stream. So that's pretty cool. And then it sets all this boilerplate code up for us, so we can set up data sources, we can set up like custom GraphQL schema directives, we can like mock out data, we can actually add, here's the resolvers I was talking about before, and then we can do the type defs. It just goes into the schema GraphQL file. So that's essentially the server. Now, if you're wondering, like that's pretty complicated or it's not really easy, if you go back to the documentation, so if we take a look at the documentation and go to, let's see here, the mocks, it tells you like here's what mocks are, here's what the directives is, an annotation entered in GraphQL schema, it tells you what the Apollo engine is, it talks about how to use the server, how to start. So it's the documentation's here. We'll look at this in a second, some of this options here. Client state, mocks, directives. So it's pretty good. The documentation here for this is for the Vue CLI. I'll include this in link in the description below, but it's pretty thorough to understand it. And there's actually environmental variables that you can set. So I'll show you guys that. So if we go back to here and now we look at the configuration, there is inside our inside our main.js file, we set up this Apollo provider, and that's grabbed through this Vue Apollo file, and that's this one right here. And this is really where most of the configuration comes from. Now, like I said, this is all boilerplate, so you could change all this, or you could not even, if you want to, you could delete this whole file and create your own one. But like this is where you set the endpoint, or it grabs it from environmental variable. This is where it actually has this files root here. Let's see more default options. I'm not sure what all this does, but it kind of explains some of it. Like this is your WebSockets endpoint. That's all set up for you. Here's the create provider that was referenced inside this home.vue, that other file that I had open. And so it's taking all these like default options that we have here and all the other options, using the spread operator and adding it into the create Apollo client. And then it's also creating the provider and an error handler. So it does this all for you, which is pretty nice. And like I said, in the documentation, it does go over quite a bit of it. Now, there's also this GraphQL folder, which is the next thing I wanted to talk to you guys about. So if we bring back the documentation, and by the way, if you guys like this topic and you want more information, I could definitely do a whole video. We'll go through, we'll use the Vue CLI Apollo plugin. We'll create our own GraphQL server. We'll maybe do something simple like a to-do list or something like that. If you're interested, I want you to leave a comment below and let me know if that would be something you want to watch. Let me know below, and that would really help me out. Because this video will just be like an overview of it. So you can see here, all this is about is like all the different configuration that comes with the Vue CLI Vue CLI Apollo plugin once you install it. Like how do you run the server, the basic usage of it, configuration, things like that. What you want to do though is after you get through the configuration, you kind of want to start using GraphQL, and that's where you want to look at this plugin. It's called the Vue Apollo. So there's a lot of levels of abstraction here, but you get with Vue CLI plugin, you get the Vue Apollo plugin or package installed as well. And this is how you're really going to talk to your GraphQL server. And it has some really cool things in it. So this is Vue specific, and their documentation is pretty good. So it tells you like what is GraphQL, what is Apollo. Like I didn't even explain that at the beginning of the video, but Apollo is a set of tools and community effort to help use GraphQL in your apps. It's well known for its clients and server. So this tells you don't need to worry about installation because you already installed it. But essentially the way you do it is you have this Apollo object here, and inside this Apollo object, and you also get this $ Apollo. This is where you can do like your GraphQL queries, and where you can do your mutations and things like that. And this gives you some examples of different queries, parameters, options that you can pass into it. How do you do mutations, and all that. So what you guys might be more interested in is there's actually something called Apollo components. And so let's take a look at that, and I'll come back to this documentation here. So in part of the boilerplate code that you get with the Vue CLI Apollo is inside components, you have this Apollo example file. And you can see here right away, here's the Apollo query. And what this is doing is you can actually, with these Apollo query, it's basically a way to create Apollo queries directly in your templates instead of using the Apollo query Apollo object at the bottom. And the advantage of that is that you can, it's all in one place. And it's also really, I guess it would be a little bit more simpler to use and to understand as you use it. That in the documentation, it says one of the benefits is that in some cases it says the benefit is that you can use these components in the template directly instead of using the Apollo option of your component. In some cases, you don't even need to add a script part at all in your .vue. This is even more declarative. So it's more of a declarative way. So what this is saying is it's actually, you can point to the file, or you can actually put the GraphQL query right in here. So in this case, in the boilerplate, they created a GraphQL folder, and that's where they put all the GraphQL queries. So if you go to hello world, this is the query, hello world, the name string, hello, and the string right there. So that's how it works. So in the Apollo example, they're actually passing the name as a variable into the hello world, and then it's replacing it. It's actually, after this query is done, you get this. This is another reason you might want to use it. You get this slot scope, and you get this result object that has loading, error, and data. So you can have different message when it's loading the data, if it gets an error, and then the result. And that's this data.hello. So that's the way it works. So if we look at our playground again, it's essentially doing something like this. It's doing hello, and then it's passing a name string in, like Erik, and it's running that, and it's returning hello Erik. And so when it runs that, that's why it says hello Erik here. That's the string that's getting back from the GraphQL server, and it's displaying it right here, this data.hello. And then there's Apollo query again for messages, but there's something called Apollo subscribe to more. And if we look at the documentation, you can look at here, and this is, you can subscribe to more data, Apollo subscribe to more. You can put as many as you want inside Apollo query component. So you kind of embed it inside the Apollo query, but it's really good for if you're using WebSockets and messages and you're subscribing to those messages. So that's one way to do it. And you can also do Apollo mutation. So I think we have one of those in here too. Here it is, Apollo mutation. You put the colon mutation, and then this one has to add message, which is this one right here. So this takes the input, message input, and sends it over. And so here's the variable with the input and the text, the new message, and that's gotten from the new message is retrieved from here, this form right here. So you have this form, this vModel input, it gets it from the form, and then submits it in the mutation. So that's really handy too. So you can see it's once you understand what it's doing, it's very verbose and makes it a lot easier to write. But you could still fall back to writing your queries inside this Apollo object here. And then at the bottom, like for example, in the images, let's see right here, you can do a file upload. They have this this von directive for change on upload image. And so on upload image, it's an async await. You can do this Apollo mutate, and then you pass in the mutation, which is called upload file, the variable name, which is the target file that gets passed in. You can see here, it's target. And then you can even set an update. So this is all a part of this Apollo helper. So that's a lot to go over. I know we've been talking for a little while. I didn't want to confuse you guys, but this is a really cool. What I would do is download, use Vue CLI, create a project, add Vue CLI Apollo, and just start looking at these files and try to understand what it's doing. Like I said, if you guys are interested in more in-depth on this, I'll try to create a little app for it. Let me know in the comments below, and maybe in the next video I'll do that. So I appreciate it. If you guys have any questions, also a great place to do is leave a comment below. Thanks. Bye.